Today we're going to talk about tanking in New World. I've been tanking expeditions and leveling as well, and while some people don't always seem to think you need a tank, they make the PvE expeditions so much simpler if you do have one. So let's get into my tanking and leveling build that I've been using in New World. Let's go. This video is brought to you by my YouTube live streaming. I've been live streaming on this channel at least once a week for the past month or so. If you can stop by, do stop by and say g'day. Let's go. This build is a really good hybrid so that you can succeed in the expeditions and the group content like the corrupted or elite zones, while also being able to hold your own in leveling and not actually be too weak in terms of damage. You know, if you expect too much into tanking, it can take you some time to deal a lot of damage to enemies, but this build should alleviate some of that issue. Tanking is different in New World. There is no threat meter mod that you can download to check, make sure you've got the most threat on the mobs. In order to generate more threat, you need to buy the carnelian gem from the trading post or make one yourself from the stone cutting station. You need to slot this into your weapon, primarily on both of your weapons, which means that you need to have a main weapon and secondary weapon that has a spare gem slot so you can put this gem on. This basically turns you into a tank. You need to have this gem. This gem will morph some of your abilities into tanking abilities, giving them taunt effects on top of their original effects, whatever they may do. For all the melee weapons, this will change one specific ability, so you want to pay attention and figure out what ability that is. And for the sword and shield defender line, it actually changes two of the abilities into a taunt. So you really want to have the sword and shield so you've got the most amount of tanks, and then have a secondary weapon, whatever that may be. And for this build, we're going with the Warhammer. Now let's get into those weapon masteries, and then we'll talk about some attributes and some gear, and then we'll talk about the general tank play and generating threat as a tank in New World. For weapon masteries, this is a leveling build, so we're going to be focusing on around that 10 weapon mastery point, which you can get to pretty comfortably if you're just using these weapons pretty early on in the game. We'll start off with the sword and shield, and now we're obviously going to be focusing on the defender line as we are a tank. Shield Rush is the first ability, and basically what it does is it's a distance closer, get you a little bit of extra damage. You won't be using this too much unless you're trying to get in close to enemies. Shield Bash is a single target taunt that you will be using pretty regularly as a taunt to get certain particular enemies away from other characters, or just when you're fighting a boss, you want to be able to keep that boss on you. Defiant Stance is your primary AoE taunt ability that you will be using. We are upgrading Defiant Stance as well so that we get the restoration, so you gain 15% health of your max health when Defiant Stance ends, and we are also picking up a few passives in the defender line. We won't really be picking up anything in the Swordmaster line. At least at this point, there is some valuable things down there. The main one you want to pick up is Sturdy Grip. Stamina damage is reduced by 15 when blocking a melee attack. We're going to be doing a whole lot of blocking, which we'll talk about a little bit later. You do want to pick up Sturdy Shield for some extra 15% physical armor. Defensive Training, so when you block an attack, you gain 10% Fortify for 5 seconds, and Recuperation, so all incoming healing and regeneration is increased by 10%. That's basically everything you need for the Sword and Shield. Now, when you're leveling Sword and Shield early on, you may want to go Swordmaster while you're just leveling up before you hit the first dungeon. You can respec simply for free before level 10, so you could just drop the shield, just run the sword, pick up Swordmaster skills, and then switch over when you do need to later down the line. For the Warhammer, which is our secondary weapon. This weapon is primarily used for crowd control, big AoE hits, and to modify what the enemies are doing in the battlefield. Firstly, in Juggernaut, we are going to pick up the increased armor penetration by 10% for all Warhammer standard attacks, just so that we can get Mighty Gather, which is a decent small AoE ability that you will use often. It has a pretty short cooldown, so you can smack this down pretty regularly. I prefer this over Clear Out. Now, Clear Out gives you a wide swing in front of you, and it knocks enemies back by 4 meters. Now, as a tank, you don't really want to be knocking enemies away from you. Really, in any build, unless PvP maybe, you don't really want to be knocking enemies away from you and disrupting them in that way. Stunning, fantastic. Knocking them away, not so good. Now, the main abilities that you're going to be using is Shockwave, which is a big AoE taunt that you're going to be using. We are leveling this up to get the Meteoric Crater to increase the range of the Shockwave to give us a bigger taunt range that we can get as well. And Path of Destiny, which is a AoE attack directly in front of you, like a line in front of you, which is good to use so you can hit multiple enemies in front and just keep hitting enemies that maybe they're a little bit further away, like an archer or something. You can keep your threat high on them. There are really good options in the passives here, but the two main ones you want to pick up are I can do this all day because it reduces the stamina consumption by 30% when blocking melee attacks. We're always going to be blocking, and Prevailing Spirit. So you regain 35% of damage dealt as health when using a Crowd Crush ability. So when you use Shockwave or when you use Path of Destiny, you get some of that back as health, so you can keep restoring yourself and keep yourself up and healthy during the fight. I also have toyed around a lot with the Hatchet. Now, Berserk is such a good ability. It gives you self-sustain, it gives you movement speed, it increases your haste. It's just fantastic to have. Though I have found in the expeditions, the Hammer outweighs this because of the AoE stuns and staggers that you can get from its abilities compared to the Hatchet, which is really just the Berserk ability. That's all is the huge benefit from the Hatchet, though I do use it a little bit while leveling. Now let's talk about attributes. And as you may expect with a tank, we are going to be stacking Constitution pretty much primarily just for that juicy health. You do want to stack this as much as possible. The sooner you can get to 100, the better, because it will increase your max health by 10% of your physical armor. However, it doesn't hurt to put a couple of points into the strength line just so you can get to 50 strength early on to give you a 5% damage increase to your melee light attacks, because you're going to be using a lot of light attacks both in dungeons and while you're out leveling. 5% damage is nothing to sneeze at. For your tank gear, there are two sets that you need to focus on, one of them being the Barbarian, which adds major strength and minor constitution to the gear, as well as of the Knight, which adds minor strength and major constitution. If you can get any gear that is within these two fields or sets, then you are laughing. These are the two main sets of armor you want to focus on, whether you're buying gear off the trading post or you are finding it out in the wild. If it says of the Barbarian or of the Knight, that is the main focus. For your equipment load, while you are in the expeditions, you do want to have a heavy equipment load, mainly for the blocking stability, as that is a critical thing you want to be doing as a tank, is blocking the damage that's coming towards you. When you're out leveling, if you can get yourself into the light or the normal categories by taking off your chest piece or your shield, then it's a good thing to do because you get a little bit of extra bonus damage from normal or from light. And while I have been exploring the world, I typically take off as much gear as possible to get myself into the light category so that I can do the roll cancel animation so I can explore a little bit quicker. And the last note with gear is that we are using the kite shield for the extra blocking stability, as blocking is so critical for a tank. So let's talk about how to actually tank. Basically, every fight you will start out with either your Shockwave taunt or your Defiant Stance taunt, preferably your Defiant Stance, although Shockwave if Defiant Stance is on cooldown. This will make the enemies attack you with their first attack. You should block these initial attacks. Try to keep them all in front of you so that you can block it and block that damage coming towards you. Blocking does generate threat, so by doing this, you're generating threat. You're also stopping that damage from actually hitting you because it's going towards your stamina, so your healer has a better time, and it's not staggering you constantly, because when you're tanking 5, 6, 7 enemies all at once and they're all swinging their big weapons at you, it will constantly stagger you and you'll basically just be stun locked the whole time. After their first attacks, this is when I will typically swing my own weapon to generate more threat, or switch to my Shockwave on my hammer if I do need a little bit more AoE taunt if some of the enemies are starting to move off. Shield Bash is my only last resort taunt. I save this until I absolutely need it. It's practically single target. You can sometimes hit multiple enemies with it. I primarily use this to pull an enemy off a healer, or if there's a boss, just to keep my taunt and active threat up on the boss. There is no threat meter here, so it can be hard to tell if enemies are actually focusing you over an ally. The best way that I have found is to slightly move yourself away from the party and also face the party so that the enemies' backs are facing the party. They can get the guaranteed crits from attacking enemies from behind, and you can tell that the enemy is actually focusing you because they're on the other side. Some general tanking tips for you is to focus on the gold enemies in the expeditions. If there are silver ones around, you obviously want to pick these up as well, but if you lose 1 or 2 stragglers, the main thing is that you are keeping the gold enemies on you, because these are the major elites that you want to keep attacking you rather than someone else. In a lot of the boss fights, they are all based around adds, and what an add is like a smaller enemy that spawns by the boss and just deals a little bit of damage. Most of the boss fights have some kind of add mechanic. If you can't keep the adds on you, it's not a big deal. The main thing is to keep the boss on you and try and keep things off your healers. Your DPS, for the most part, should be able to look after themselves, but you will just need to pay attention in these instances. I take my shield off when I am questing to get into that medium and light class for the damage increase. You can respec your masteries at any time, even once it does give you a cost after you hit that level 10 rank, but it is a good idea to keep yourself in medium just for the extra XP while leveling. Also, make sure you do have plenty of food and potions so you can self-sustain yourself during combat. I have tanked a dungeon without a healer just by using food and potions and a little bit of the hatchet as well because of the self-sustain you get from Berserk. And it was difficult, but it was a good time to do, but I wouldn't recommend it. Plenty of food and potions, keep yourself topped up when you do need to, but you should have a healer that can help you with most of that as well. And the final tip is to check out my combat guide, which goes through PvE and PvP combat tips for you guys. Follow me on Twitch, Instagram, and on Twitter. Thank you to all of our amazing members of this channel that keep this channel alive. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.